So just to be sharp on time, you're gonna start, and probably a few people will join us during the session. So this is the January edition of this webinar series in 2020-21 from SS Social Solidarity Economy and Commons. We already had other editions as a conference, as a presential conference, but as you all know, we are living this situation, and then we decided to have a series of webinars and preparing ourselves to the conference in 2021. So it's a truly pleasure and an honor to have these speakers here, and I'm really happy that we could organize all this to have all of you with us, and also to thank you participants that are here to learn, to listen, to share, and to afterwards we can have a bigger conversation with all in the end. This theme is a very personal theme as well for me, because this is part of my PhD project on ISCTE, the Lisbon University Institute. It's one of the organizers of this webinar series. We also have FCT, we have SEI, the Center for International Studies at ISCTE, Asociação Mutualista Montepio, Faculdade de Ciências, the Science Faculty of Lisbon University, ECOLIS, CE3C, and UFAL, the Federal University of Alagoas. So we have here Flor Avelino from Drift Institute, if I'm saying correct, please, from Erasmus Rotterdam University, and also Filipa Pimentel from Transition Network. And for spice a little bit our conversation and provoking, we're going to have a conversation led by Maria Llanos de Curral from Asociación Bolina, and also a fellow from Schumacher College. So what I would love to do is to pass the word and inviting Flor to speak and to bring your contribution, and afterwards you're going to have Filipa, and then we come back to a larger conversation. So one thing that is important to say before, sorry Flor, is that we're going to have our microphone switch off, our video switch off of everyone, and if we have questions, please, you can send by the chat function that is on the right lower corner, probably on your screen, has 3 dots that you can have the chat function, or Alt+H. So you can go in the chat and send your question that we will be selecting afterwards to add in the conversation. So please, Flor, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Philippe. So I'm going to share my screen. It was working before. Let's hope it is working now. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Philippe and I, in our preparation for this webinar, thought that it might be good to give a bit of an overview of all these translocal networks, what they are, but also how many of them there are, to kind of give a bit of an impression. So I prepared some slides and some visuals and pictures to give a bit of an impression of this phenomenon of translocal networks. And we've been studying this, the role of translocal networks in many different projects, and I'm not going to go into the details of these projects. You can find them online. But basically, we have been looking at the role of translocal initiatives and networks in the context of social innovation and sustainability transitions and just and sustainable cities. what I wanted to share before going into translocal networks is, because translocal networks in themselves don't have an inherent intention or goal. So in our research, what we're interested in understanding is how can translocal networks contribute to tackle the societal challenges that we face today. And here, a very important starting point is that the social, the economic, and the ecological challenges that we face, that in order to tackle these, innovation is not enough. Technological innovation is not enough, but also social innovation is not enough. That's not enough to get us out of this mess, basically. We really need systemic transformative change because all these problems are so intertwined. So innovation is necessary, but not sufficient. And we need this systemic transformative change, what we would call transitions towards just and sustainable societies. So what we are interested in understanding is how can innovation then contribute, and how can initiatives and networks that work with alternatives and innovative ways of doing, thinking, and organizing, how can they contribute? And this is where this idea of transformative social innovation comes from, which we define as innovations that challenge, alter, and replace the dominant structures and institutions that underlie these challenges. So if you look at the dominant ways of doing, thinking, and organizing, it's not enough to just come up with new ways. You also need to challenge the old ways and the existing ways. So if you take the example of community energy, this phenomenon that people are producing their own energy, it's technologically innovative, it's socially innovative, but it's only transformative to the extent that it also really challenges the current energy regime, which is centralized, fossil fuel based, utterly polluting. But it's not just about the energy system, it's also about this more fundamental underlying economic system of unbridled economic growth, unbridled capitalism and extractivism. And this is where we come to the role of translocal networks, because to make this link between kind of the prefigurative, the innovative, the alternative in the local context, and then really challenging this more fundamental underlying systems, the role of translocal networks is very important. Such, for instance, RESCOP, the European Network of Energy Cooperatives, where you really see that they can bring different community energy initiatives together and then also start to lobby for change at, for instance, the European level, which then comes with all sorts of alternative legislation that can also have an impact at national level and then really put pressure on existing energy systems. So community energy and RESCOP is just one example. In one of our projects, we have looked at 20 social movements, what we call social innovation networks. So these are networks and initiatives around the world that are working on such social innovation, but also have really these transformative ambitions. And we looked at these organizations as international network organizations, but we also zoomed in to study how they manifest at local, regional, and national levels. And we looked at about 100 initiatives across 27 countries in Europe and Latin America. Filipa is going to talk more about transition networks, so I'm not going to say anything about that. She's much better equipped to do so. But I just wanted to give a few other examples also to see kind of the breadth and the diversity of these kind of initiatives. So participatory budgeting is an interesting example. To summarize it in a very simplistic way, this is where citizens get involved in deciding how municipal budgets are being spent. So taxpayers' money at the municipal level, how is it spent? And this started in Porto Alegre in the 80s, and it was very successful, and it kind of started spreading all around the world. And these researchers, Sintomer et al., and this was already back in 2012, estimated that there were 800 to 1,500 participatory budgeting initiatives around the world. And by now there are many more. So this is one example. Completely different example is the Impact Hub, which is basically co-working places where social entrepreneurs share not only a co-working space, so it's not just about office space, but it's also a way of working that is about how to make money, but do so in a sustainable and responsible way. So how to have a positive social impact on society with your enterprise. So it's this idea of social enterprise. And this first Impact Hub started in London in 2005, and then it really grew like wildfire all around the world. So now you have more than 100 Impact Hubs across the world. with more than 1,600 members. A completely different example, and it's my last example, are eco-villages. And again, to put it very simplistically, eco-villages are human-scale settlements where people try to live with each other, in harmony with each other and with nature. And what eco-villages are known for is to be pioneers in organic agriculture. So already way before organic agriculture was all around us in the supermarkets, already 50 years ago, even longer ago, eco-village communities were experimenting with organic agriculture. They're also renowned for experimenting with alternative ways of construction, so different, more sustainable ways of constructing houses. So the picture that you see here is of a eco-village in Scotland, Findhorn, where they transformed whiskey barrels into houses, which makes for very nice pictures. But besides all this kind of ecological and technological innovation, eco-villages are known also for experimenting a lot with social innovation. So experimenting with different ways of decision-making and kind of conflict mediation, like sociocracy and non-violent communication and so on. And again, eco-villages, often when I show pictures of eco-villages to some of my colleagues, they really associate it with, a bunch of hippies doing something very small and marginal. And what they often don't know is that they are quite organized, and they have this, there are thousands of eco-villages around the world, and they have they are organized in the Global Eco-Village Network, which has these different departments in different continents and regions. And not only do these, this eco-village network is not only there for eco-villages, but it also really has this mission of having transformative impact. So for instance, there's the solution library where eco-village initiatives share the kind of experiments and the solutions and the discoveries and tryouts and that they come up with. They share that with each other. There's a lot of work on education and capacity building, also in all sorts of kind of projects, capacity building projects. That's already also, there's this online summit that is annual, and I always find it really amusing because already way before all of us were forced to go online, and many of my colleagues and also European policymakers, we were still flying all around Europe and all around the world to have our conferences. Already way before Corona forced us to go online, these kind of networks, not just the Eco-Village Network, but like the Eco-Village Network, they were having lots of online conferences. So I remember my first Zoom call was with people from these kind of networks that were already very trained in doing this. And one of the things that the Eco-Village Network has done together with the Transition Towns Network and other grassroots networks was to develop this EcoLISE, the European Network for Community-Led Initiatives and Climate Change. And there you also see really this ambition to kind of have this transformative impact on society. So to organize the European Day of Sustainable Communities, collaborating with the European Union to organize this conference where we explore how citizens and local authorities can collaborate. And now there is also the Communities for Future platform where you really see this attempt to have this translocal collaboration. And one of the conclusions from our research is that what we call translocal empowerment. So that a lot of these initiatives, on the one hand, they are radically local. So it's really locally rooted and very locally embedded. But at the same time, they're also nationally, regionally, and even globally connected. And it's this particular combination of the local and the global that makes it so empowering, because on the one hand, people can see the direct results, the tangible results in their direct environment. And at the same time, they have this sense of wider impact. So we wrote publications about also explaining this empowerment process in a psychological, from a psychology perspective. I'm not going to go into the details of that now. But what I did want to say is that besides our research, where we look also from a more theoretical perspective of power and empowerment and the psychology of it and the political science of it, one of the things that we have done, and I would like to conclude with that, is try to bring people from these different networks together at the final conference of our research project. And we try to write a manifesto where we try to see, okay, there's so many differences across these different networks, but what are some of the things that they have in common? And based on these deliberations, we came up with these 13 principles. And I'm not going to go into all of them, but I would just like to conclude by sharing these principles. The first one was very much about translocal empowerment as a promising response to the challenges of globalization. So the idea is that it really helps us to have the best of the global and the local. So connecting communities internationally and promoting global solidarity, but at the same time also acknowledging and reappreciating deep local identities and traditions. And I think this is really a new narrative that can help respond to the current political debates about globalization, where you have this kind of false dichotomy between global neoliberal kind of internationalism versus kind of xenophobic nationalism. So there is really, I think this translocal story can really be an alternative. And that this can also really help to have more strategic collaboration between different networks and social movements. And I think I already spoke more than enough, so I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Flor. Where am I? Here. Thank you for your explanation, and it was really good to see at least all the wider capacity of the networks and how we can definitely connect this global sensing with the local identity and all that. So I not talking much more, and also want to call Filipa to bring your word and unmute yourself to start your talk, please.
Thank you for the invitation. We are at the moment very, very taken, so a bit overwhelmed with work, but I wanted to be present. But you need to look at my face because I did not prepare the slides, and I hope that it's okay. So just to go to the center of the question. So I'm part of one of these networks. So the transition movement or transition network is an ongoing experiment, a global one. And what we say is that it's a movement of local communities, local groups coming together. And what they do is to imagine the world that you want to live in, really, and start to plan to contribute for that, for that world to be built in a way. And what is important is that it is done through the process of creating this healthy human culture. So, and the movement itself started in 2005, the first initiative in Totnes. And since then, it has been growing so much. So you have now registered presence in 50 countries. There are thousands of initiatives. We don't know exactly how many because you only know that they exist if they register in the website, and this doesn't happen always. So there is much more than that. So in a way, just like Flor explained, these are groups and communities that get together to address global challenges, big challenges, but they start local at their scale. And the way that they do it, it's very dependent on the context itself, their own preferences and energy. So this means that it's like a movement where loads of things are happening all over the world that are incredibly diverse, right? So it's very diverse. And then what happens is exactly what Flor was saying. All these initiatives are organized in networks. So in a way, there are several scales of it. There is, can be country, regional, and then international. And there are several structures that support that work being done on the ground. One of those structures is Transition Network, that is the charity in UK that does support, but there are many other structures at the moment, and we experiment quite a lot with shared governance. So we have a Transition Network, we have shared governance in place, like it's a hybrid between sociocracy and holacracy, so we experiment there. So one of the things that happens is that who is in and who is out this transition movement? And it's not very clear, because a part of being registered, there is quite a lot of freedom, because it's a bottom up, we have direction, but no one is going to control if a certain initiative is an initiative of transition. So there is quite a lot of freedom to be what people want to be. So in a way, but there is a transition model, right? So at the moment we are looking at trying to understand what are the characteristics of transition initiatives. And we have gathered a list. So for example, what they do normally, they raise awareness. A lot of those initiatives are there, bringing awareness so supporting people to understand very complex and systemic subjects, create positive narratives. So one of the things that it's very important for the transition movement is this common positive vision of a resilient future, in order to be able to start working for it. There is a big part that is support in a transformation, in a transition, because most of all this mess is very difficult to tackle because of our own patterns. And it's very important to start to understand what's going on inside to be able to change. We will not change the whole system if we don't start changing ourselves and our habits and etc. Most of them, so I think that it would be it's the main characteristic. There is this joy of the practical projects. So doing stuff, it's very, very important for people in the transition movement. And it could be in anything. So it could be as complex as the world is. So it could be in food, in whatever. So there is a lot of celebration. So connection with each other is very important as well. Creation of new forms of new forms of economy. And there is another thing that is very important, it seems, that it becomes more and more important in the movement. There is this, we use all these collective intelligence tools, a lot of innovation in that. So a lot of groups are working as conveners, as getting people together and connect with each other in order to plan what they want to do. And then there is a lot as well of connection with other organizations. So there is as well now a real movement to address injustice, in spite of being an area that is a lot of experimenting and thinking what is really the role of the transition movement there. So at the moment, we are going through an evaluation process, and we are that is held by a researcher, a contractor researcher that is doing that. And we are looking at the data. So we had like 377 responses from 32 countries. And it is interesting how people are seeing what they are contributing and what are the challenges. And I could name some. Maybe it's useful for later reflection. So one of the things that people think that is really, really positive is the fact that they are part of a learning network. You are taking action, having the freedom to do whatever you want using this model, but still you are connected with others, that, like Flor said, so you see the impact that we could do because you are not alone. This is one of the things that we hear very often in activists. We are alone. We have the impression that we are alone. So in that case, not. And then there is these positive stories that we tell. We tend to tell these stories at human scale that can be very inspiring for other people to do the same thing. The fact that it is so emergent, it is so how do you say it? It's as you have the permission to act as your conditions, your context is, it's extremely emergent and it changes all the time. And this is one good thing, because you are responding to a problem that exists, but at the same time, it evolves so much that it could be sometimes confusing. Another thing is the systemic thinking and holistic vision. We are part of a world, mainly in the professional world, in this kind of area. People tend to talk about climate change, food. In networks like this, with citizens thinking about things, it is very systemic and very holistic in terms of, food is climate as well, and so on. So people see a very good thing there. So the process innovation that is used there and shared with others, there is a clear impression that the tools that the movement is using and distributing all over the globe are shared with others as well. So you see all this learning being spread. Another thing is the convening. For example, municipalities in transition, you might have heard of organizing and studying how you can put together a local government and citizens together to plan their future, and all the tools being shared there. People really think that this is something that is adding to the contribution. The dissemination of values as well. I would love to talk to you about Liège en Transition. It's an example of a transition initiative that has convened a process that it became free and alive by itself. That is the ceinture alimentaire. So it's like the food belt around Liège, that is a city, that is amazing. This was convened at the start with tools by the local transition initiative, and then it became an organization in itself. And it is amazing what came out, several cooperatives and a lot of things that are coming out from there. Challenges. Oh my God, challenges. It is very difficult to look for new ways of dealing with a completely different governance in terms of bottom up, and how to protect that, and being inclusive but still have focus. So these challenges come up very often. So people say we need a clearer focused message, but then people say it's fantastic that we all can fit in, because systemic is complex and complex is like that, so we need to work with that. And then, so the language, how can we communicate with everyone and have all the resources when we don't have money? Money is a problem. In networks like this, it's very difficult to find funding in the classical way, because it's an emergent, we cannot predict. And on top, failing is a good thing as well, in terms of how we learn with it. So how do you fit all these values of positive thinking, but failure is okay. And we can change the plans anytime when it fits. So all that is very, very, very complex and very challenging. Another challenge is the state of mind we are all in. It is very difficult to be very positive. It is very difficult, and the state of mind of sadness and trauma and lack of hope, it is difficult to deal with when we want to do something to change stuff. So it is very important to give space for that and to be expressed and then to be dealt with. But it is a challenge. Governance, we are experimenting with governance, but we don't want it to be centralized. How do we share all these values and all these skills? Fast changing, it's very fast. How can we share the learnings when it's changing all the time? And then I think that a part of the, you know, the complexity and so on, there is one that is big, and I think Flor is, and I'm going to stop there. So Flor talked about that. That is the power. The power is in current structures. So every time that you are really seriously challenging structures like that, you have a backlash. So it is a big challenge if you want to change stuff and you are not resourced, or we don't have capacity. Most of the movement is a volunteer movement. The money is somewhere else, and people cannot be resourced in doing these things. So yeah, it's a big challenge if you want to seriously challenge the structures. How does the power respond back to you? Oh my God. Yeah, I could say so much more, but I'm stopping here.
Thank you very much. That was lovely, so heartful and so full of courage. And I would like to, I have so many questions in my mind right now, but I really want to bring in Maria. So Maria, could you jump in the conversation, and if you want to bring some comments of everything that you just heard, and bring your experience, and also if you feel comfortable and want to have to ask to the speakers and start our freer conversation here.
Thank you, Felipe, and thank you very much, Flor and Filipa. It has been really inspiring to hear all the examples that you have brought, and both the achievements, let's say, or your experience with that, and also the challenges, which is fundamental to talk about. I think I have certain thoughts that will kind of like guide my questions. And it has to do with this, with what you presented first, Flor, about systemic transformative change. And that has to be compounded with challenging the old ways. So what Filipa was referring to now about really challenging structures, and also creating the new. And yeah, so some of my questions or my wonderings had to do with what concrete, so these gatherings, these networks, how do these networks, in your experience, if perhaps concrete cases, how these networks have become more than the sum of its parts? So how the coming together have created something that has been transformative in this sense of challenging the old ways and also creating the new. Perhaps concrete examples that we can see. I mean, I have in my head the new municipalism movement, and how the coming together of social movements with alternative structures in Spain, for example, form these new political parties, and that has really changed the political landscape in Spain. So I was wondering, in more concrete examples of these networks becoming more than the sum of its parts, and then maybe this, then I'm going to link it to another very interesting question that I think Filipa also brought at the end, and Flor at the beginning, and is also part of her research, that is about power. So how do you challenge power? But then also, how do you handle, manage power within the network? So what are this is another question, what are the structures, decision-making models, ways of organizing that, in your experience, had been more useful for networks to be not only sustainable in terms of time, but perhaps also transformative. So it has really catalyzed creativity and allow networks to be much more transformative and impactful. So those are kind of the two things that I'm thinking about.
Great, Maria. I would like to invite, if you would like, Flor and Filipa to have your videos on, so you can both, so you can now. Thank you. And your mic as well.
We're very good citizens. We wait to get the word. Do you want me to respond?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a very good question, and it's something that I notice as soon as I present these networks in not in all, but in many fields of research that are focused more on political contestation, social movements, or more in a kind of justice context. There is often a lot of skepticism about these kind of movements because they're very positive, and they're very focused on creating new things, on creating alternatives. And often people also think that they are apolitical. And I think to a certain extent, there are a lot of people within those movements that do focus on creating the new and that don't want to get too much involved in politics. But I think you have that everywhere, and we cannot expect everybody to become a political activist. So we also need to acknowledge that I think this is one of the things that makes these movements interesting and attractive, is that also people that don't want to be explicitly a political activist can still get involved in the politics of everyday life. So there's actually two answers to your question. On the one hand, there is the acknowledgement that challenging the existing is by showing that the alternative is working. So really by example. So all these, cliche quotes about be the change that you want to see in the world, and if you want to replace the existing, the old, do it by showing that the existing is more powerful. So there's that aspect to it. But I also think there's another aspect to these movements that we often don't see, because it's often the very hard institutional work that can also get a bit boring. And then, so for instance, to give you concrete examples, what you asked for, I mentioned the community energy, the energy cooperatives. If you look at RISCOP, of course, municipalism, I think, is a great example of translocal collaboration. But in municipalism, it's often dependent on municipal authorities that are willing to go along with these grassroots initiatives. I think Maria is frozen. Can she still hear us?
I'm not sure. Yeah, well, she's there. Yeah, there's.
Okay.
I just
Suddenly
came back. I thought it was only, was
Okay.
all of us, but it was only me. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So in municipalism, it often depends on local authorities that are also willing and want to collaborate with grassroots initiatives, like the great example of Barcelona. And I'm very happy that those exist, but we will also always have political constellations and local authorities that are not so willing. And there, the translocal collaboration becomes really interesting, like in the case of energy cooperatives, where the European energy cooperatives got together and managed to lobby and influence European decision-making and regulations and lawmaking that currently are then, for instance, forcing national legislation to make space for community-led energy production. So even when local authorities don't want to make space for that, there is now pressure from European level to allow space for prosumerism, so for consumers to produce their own energy. And I think this is a very interesting example that rather than making everything dependent on local collaboration between community-led initiatives and willing local authorities, that there can also be some strategic collaboration at the international and regional level to kind of put pressure on legislation. So I think that's a concrete example. But another example is all the eco-villages that we looked at, each and single last one of them, the ones that we studied, had conflicts with local authorities. Yeah, because they're doing for instance, the whole construction in a different way. It's always there is no legislation for that because it's new, it's innovative, it's a different way of construction. So all of them always have problems about zoning or about the construction, or there's always trouble with that. And you see that there is a lot of hard institutional work there, because even if the local authorities are willing to support them, they often cannot according to the law. So they then need to find ways, how do we make it possible? Because we know these people have good intentions, they want to make buildings more sustainable. So, and then you start to see interesting things that even though it's a very small initiative, a very small example, if the law is changed in order to make an initiative possible, you set a precedent that makes many more initiatives possible. So then there is systemic change to a certain way. It's a very indirect way and it takes very long, but I think it's a crucial one. And in transition theory, we emphasize that a lot, that the fact that things are very small doesn't mean they can make a huge difference. Because if the regime is confronted with that and the current structure cannot provide space for it, but has to adapt its laws and regulations so that it can happen, then something real changes. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking, otherwise there's no discussion. Thank you.
Maria, I suppose that you want me to answer mainly to the second one or to the first one as well?
I think you gave a little bit of examples of the first one, and I was curious about the second and the first. I mean, whatever you choose. Also, okay. Flor, perhaps so, your insight on power and structures within the.
Okay.
But
so
Filipa, thank you.
Just let me tell you that what is political, what is apolitical, what is activism? It is so. I always challenge these kind of things. Even if I think that I totally agree with Flor, there is this vision or a perception of movements that are very positive and very inclusive. So you don't want to talk about politics. But when we say we don't want to talk about politics, it's the political parties mainly and the political dogmas and things like that. But being, being a certain kind of consumer, this is activism in my point of view. So there is all these things indirectly, like Flor was saying, and there is a lot of diversity in the movement, depending on the context where they are. There are activists that maybe, and then there is this question of people that within their transition initiative, they are not organizing protest, but then aside they will. So, and there is as diverse as possible. There are transitioners that ran for mayor, and they are mayors now. There are activism, real activism that is so fun, like during the night planting a garden in a parking place. So I don't know, there is activism like that, and it's very political. So there is a lot of diversity there. About, if I go to and at all scales, even in European level, we are part of Ecolisa, and what we see as well is that for Transition Network itself, there is a lot of interest at EU level, for example, to hear what we have to say. and you see changes, but we don't exactly know because it's so systemic, and so we present ourselves in such in a different way that classical lobbyists present themselves. So we don't have like amendments and we cannot measure it passes or not. We don't do that. We present ourselves as contributing to create conversations, to create discussion, to bring our perspectives and things like that. And so we don't know exactly what are the effects of that, but I hope we will know one day. For the decision making, I tell you that an example like this, it's really clear. The transition network, so the charity that supports the movement, the main one, some years ago, I think it was 4 years ago, we decided to shift our governance. So we were trained, we were very, very lucky because we had a funder that funded us to do that process. And we were accompanied by an organization that is called Université du Nou, that have this process of holacracy, sociocracy, and we were trained, accompanied to shift all the governance. So, and our life changed. In my opinion, personally, it changed my professional life to be in that kind of thinking and governance. After that, several circles in our ecosystem, like we call it, we are decentralizing power from transition network to the fringes. So we have now a circle of regional and national hubs that detain power. And there is shared governance as well. Now there is a circle that is municipalities in transition, and they have their own power, and there is the training circle and so on. So we are doing that slowly, and we are experimenting. So we are a learning network. So it means that we experiment and we share results and challenges and so on with the rest of the movement, hoping that it goes like that instead of enforcing a way of governance to the whole movement, you see.
Maria.
I would just say that I will grab a coffee and continue this conversation, follow up on your thoughts, but I'll pass it on to you, Filipa, and a lot of the questions that have been posted also on the chat.
Yeah, I was just
asking.
If there is something that you would want to add here, and something that is burning. If not, I would like to just bring one of the questions, and I also suggest to everyone that has a question that we will not have time enough to answer because we are 10 minutes to go. You could send to me to my email, and then I can try to send back to Filipa and Flor, and if you try to answer back by email this question that from the audience. What do you think, Filipa and Flor? Is that all right? Okay, great. So
it's okay, and if someone wants to contact me directly, you can find me.
This is good.
There,
yeah.
in the cloud.
Yeah. So I'm just wanted to bring N Sneak. I don't know if I'm saying correctly. Question, because I think it goes to our main. Well, not the main, but one of the objectives we had to this session. So her question: if these communities are just in rural areas, but in the cities, if they are in the cities as well. Liège and Transition is a good example, but she wants to know if there are more other examples, and if there are other movements like donut economics that now is embraced by Amsterdam and Brussels. If this is in this commons-oriented emergent movement, what else do you have to comment on that, Flor and Filipa? What can we bring from the cities? And adding on top of what Annie was asking, I am very interested on the urban area, just mainly because the urban space is less defined in boundaries, and limits are much less defined than the rural, the eco-village that is a community with walls and all that. So I think it's a big challenge to work in the urban, in the city, with all the influence much more alive, yeah, much more burning than we were. So please go ahead if you could answer that.
Yeah, it's of course a very big question, and I notice because I've studied so much the eco-villages that often in my talks that I get excited about talking about eco-villages, and then people remember the eco-villages and they say, oh, but that's rural, so that doesn't apply to the urban, which is of course, especially in the case of eco-villages, often the case. But two things. A lot of the other examples I mentioned, participatory budgeting, the impact hub network, for instance, is entirely urban. I don't think there's a rural impact hub. Maybe I missed it, but it's kind of completely dependent on being in the urban space. Also, participatory budgeting, I think there's many examples, but I think the most active participatory budgeting examples are in the urban context because it's about citizens coming together and debating how to, but yeah, so at least it's both, and I would expect maybe more urban than rural. And then, of course, transition towns, it's all sorts of geographical context. And one of the things I find very fascinating about transition towns, but Filipa, please correct me, is that it's really able to bring eco-village ideas or ideas from permaculture and things that people sometimes associate with the rural, and really bring that to the urban context, like in the form of urban farming, and how to do things that we always thought, oh, this is not possible in the urban context. It's only possible when you go live in a farm back to the land, and to really reappropriate and reclaim the urban space as still this is our space, even if it's urban. So I think the answer is yes, absolutely. These examples are very much about the urban commons. And the other question that Anna asked about things like donut economics, and also Maria mentioned municipalism. I haven't really studied this in depth yet, but it's one of my main dreams to really study this movement of municipalism and fearless cities. I think it's really fascinating to look at this collaboration between local authorities. And here also, because I completely agree that politics is more than party politics, but recent years, since all the nightmare politics of the past years, I have also started to emphasize we need all types of politics, including party politics. And I'm really hoping that this collaboration with local authorities and municipalism will also bring back this connection with party politics and the kind of more formal democratic systems. So that's what I also find very interesting about this municipalism, because it's not an entirely coincidence that donut economics was embraced by Amsterdam when the Green Left Party was in power. So we cannot see these things separate. And I think we need to, without saying that everybody needs to become involved in party politics, I do think it's a crucial element of transformative change, and we cannot do without it.
From my side, there is a little trick here about, so for example, Liège en transition that I talked about, people say, but other examples like Liège. So for example, the Ceinture de Liège en transition has been the catalyzer for several cities in Belgium to do the same. And they have initiatives. So I think that transition initiatives in urban areas are a lot, but you can see them in several scales. So you can have just a neighborhood, and then they can organize and have a bigger one. Because of that, I could say, like, for example, Tuieiras in Transição in Portugal, in Lisbon, they are super active. They are part of the project of municipalities in transition, but it's a neighborhood of Lisbon, and you have others. In London, they are like 100 or something like that in the region. In Paris, you have as well several ones that are part of a hub. There is a hub that organizes a network of initiatives in Paris. So it's just a question of this thing of a city in transition. It does not work like that. You can have a network organized of initiatives, and you could have one initiative that is convening a lot of things happening in the same city. There is no recipe. In fact, people are experimenting and see how they can organize. But like Flor says, in cities, you have so much to do. Is there change needed in cities or not? Yes. So initiatives have loads of things to do. There are loads of ideas. It can be on sustainable consumerism. It can be on energy. It can be in local, urban farming. It can be whatever you want to address in your city. It can be there as a transition initiative. So, and I could tell you so many good examples of incredible things happening. And I am, for example, now I'm not doing that for a while because there is COVID, but in Brussels, there is the Brussels in Transition, Transition 1000 Bruxelles. And I am someone who volunteers in the Repair Café, and I always come with my sewing machine. And this is what I do there. So I'm part of the Repair Café, for example. So, and there was something else that you wanted to ask, no? Municipalities in transition. I would invite you to go and look at the website, because all the, you have the pilots, you have several examples, the tools, etc. But there is a lot of experimenting there.
Thank you, Filipa. We are just running out of time. Just want to check if Maria has one last comment, and then I can close.
Yeah, perhaps just to say how interesting initiatives, like, I mean, I have been very close to new municipalism here in Spain, and really interested in these collaborations amongst networks, like from social movements to political parties to social entrepreneurs. And I think Ecolis, for example, is you both are part of that, both your organizations part of that movements that that networks that can also bring a lot of systemic change, I think, in the future to come, and is already having quite a lot of impact in as a lobby and as an instigator. That was my last contribution for tonight, and thank you.
Thank you. I would love to have much more time, and then we could really go in deeper on that. This is very instigating. I just want to thank you, everyone that was present here. Also, thank you very much, Ana Margarida Esteves. She's the main head of all that. And hey, Ana, if you just want to say a word, Ana.
Yes, thank you so much to all the participants, and thank you so much for you, Filipa, for organizing this excellent panel. And next month we'll have another one.
Yep.
Did you already hear from Leonardo?
No, he didn't come back with the theme yet, but pay attention in our blog. I already sent by email. I don't know if everyone have it, but find us in our social networks, and then we can send the blog, can send by email, and I send you back the blog link. And we're gonna have each month we're gonna have one a webinar, right, Anna? Until
yes, exactly.
September.
It's until October. Of course, we'll have a break during the summer, but we're planning to organize webinars until October, and then we'll see. We'll keep the webinar version during the pandemic, and after the pandemic, we'll be back to having the annual Social and Solidarity Economy Conference and Social Solidarity Economy and Commons Conference. These webinars are a way for us to keep in touch and to build community during this challenging period.
Thank you
And to
all.
keep
Thank
on
you.
exchanging
Thank you
ideas.
very much, Flor. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the
Filipa.
invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you.
It was a great session and full of insights. Thank you.
Absolutely.